Hey kids, welcome to another episode of GLEN YAPS. You'll be happy to know that I probably won't be talking too much. My throat is worn out from a lot of singing in the studio and singing live the last couple of days, so it's a little ripe. Um, but anyways, um, doing a kind of an influential album kind of chat today. I wrote down a bunch of albums that influenced me. They probably influenced others, I'm sure. Um, but it's amazing um, when you talk to musicians where their influences come from. And I bet you won't find two musicians with the same influences. Like if you go down a list, it's almost impossible, right? Um, So for me, I started getting into music because my entire family was musicians, except for my younger sister. Um, but my brother and older sister, both musicians. My brother was a singer also, lead singer. I did not inherit his talents for vocals. I'm a singer, but not a good singer. But my mother was a piano player, singer. My father was a fiddle player. My stepfather was a guitar player, singer. So, plus all of their friends were musicians. So I've got all these influences from them. Um, so I could go on forever of what influenced me, and every little style, um, like jazz, rock, R&B, and country and western, they all influence me. Um, and it's like a melting pot. You absorb all of these things into your soul, and you develop your own style, your own. If you're into songwriting, your own style of writing. But for me, that's just basically the seeds were planted by the people I lived with at the time. So, I, my earliest influences were our family watching the Ed Sullivan Show. So, I saw a lot of music on there that influenced me. Obviously, the Beatles. I was just a tiny little squirt at the time. I heard the music, and it didn't like influence me to play drums at that particular time, but it was like the melodies stuck in my head. As a young kid, I was always getting these melodies stuck in my head. Um, so obviously the Beatles and the Young Rascals were a band that stuck in my head when I used to see them on TV shows. I loved their music, and their drummer later on became one of my influences, Dino Danelli. Um, but it's weird. My parents used to play country and western and gospel, so one of the ones that stuck in my head was Grandpa Jones and his banjo playing, and I still have Grandpa Jones albums. People might find that funny. It's like, oh, this prog rock jazz nut is a Grandpa Jones fan. Yeah, I like this stuff. It was just fun to listen to. I think a lot of that influence comes from Hee Haw, but I heard Grandpa Jones before the Hee Haw show. So, um, and like I say, the albums were my parents, and I played them all the time. So, even like John Denver and things like that, I was huge influence, or he was a huge influence on my getting into music. So, anyways, the biggies. We're going to go with the big ones here. So, and now there's quite a few. Just going to touch on them because, like I say, I could go on, and most musicians could. So, the album that I remember changing my life and making me aware of music on a different level, and basically wanting to be a drummer, uh, was a Beatles album called Rubber Soul. And Ringo gets a lot of heat, because he's a more basic player, but his feel and his simple grooves uh, are what got me focused on that instrument. And it wasn't just because the Beatles were popular, because I was a little kid at the time. I didn't know the difference, what was popular or not. I just know when the Rubber Soul album was on my brother's stereo, and he had the album. And it just happened to be left there. He had a stereo in our living room near the window. And that album sat off to the side. And the album cover intrigued me, with the four of them. It was like a different style of album cover. It was kind of on a corner, kitty corner look to it. And I gravitated to it. And the album wasn't in it. The album was actually sitting on the turntable, so I just clicked the turntable. Now, at that time, I didn't know much about stereos either. I used to take my Matchbox cars and run it on the turntable, running it around. So I'm sure one time I ran my Matchbox cars across this Rubber Soul album. But needless to say, the needle ended up on that album, and I was mesmerized by the sound of that album. And even to this day, that one is a standout for me, Beatles-wise. So that's the one that focused me into the music arena. And from then on, it's been a roller coaster ride. But that album changed my life and got me into music. So other Beatles albums, Sgt. Pepper. I absolutely love that album. You hear about it later, being remastered and stuff. I still like the original version, but the remasters are great, and you hear some other things in there. But messing with perfection, I basically, I'm kind of against that. I love the way the album was released on vinyl. I do have it on CD too. But the album version will always be special to me. Songwriting is amazing on that, obviously. I love what they all played on it. To me, it's like the perfect album for them. Although the band members might not agree. But for me, it just transported me somewhere where I was like, oh, this has never hit my ears before. Nothing like this has ever hit my ears, even though I was a young kid at the time. And I literally wore that album out, and I bought multiple copies of that. I still have all the worn out copies, but I did play the living shit out of that album. Magical Mystery Tour. Well, that was a compilation and kind of album with soundtracks from their kind of movie. Like Strawberry Fields and those songs will be my ultimate favorite Beatles songs. I just think they're masterpieces. I could not get enough of those songs. I can still play those songs today and still feel exactly the same way the first time I heard them. They just mesmerized me. I just thought they were pure genius. The Beatles' White Album. I love the White Album because each song is so drastically different throughout it. It's not I don't consider it a concept album. I basically call it a free-for-all. Everybody just throw their ideas in, and where they lay, that's what they sound like. I wore that album out too. I just think it's a well-recorded album, and I just love the songs on it. There are drumming highlights, but each one of the musicians in that band and the songwriting on that album affected me. So it just carried me on to another level. And I used to play drums to these songs on those albums constantly. So I'm not going in any type of order here. So to carry on with the Beatles, I loved Paul McCartney and Wings. I did love Ringo Starr's solo stuff and John Lennon and George Harrison. I bought it all. But Paul McCartney and Wings put out a live album, I think Live Over America. It was like a 3-album set. And the drummer on there, Joe English, he just caught my ear. And had so much energy. I just love that guy's playing. He's no longer a drummer from what I hear. I heard he's sick. He went on to be a preacher or something like that. But his time with Paul McCartney and Wings, I cherish. I love his playing with that band. But live, there's something about that guy live that had an energy that just brought Paul McCartney and Wings to a new level. Kind of like the present day drummer. I forget his name, but he's a fantastic player too. But Joe English is the guy that's set the bar for me. He played open-handed also. And that's where I started playing open-handed. I do both playing live, but Joe English is the guy that I first saw doing that. I know there were others. It's not like he invented it, but his influence on me was the first time I saw that. Ringo Starr albums, I love them all, but the first batch, especially his one just called Ringo, that's a masterpiece. I love that album. I love the artwork on it. I love the sound of it, the recording quality. His drumming's great on it. The whole band is fantastic, and they're just fun songs. One called "I'm the Greatest" is a killer song. I just love it. Okay, in that same time frame of the 70s, Canadian band called Claw 2. Their first 3 albums just blew me away. Because I was such a Beatles fanatic, and the whole rumor of Claw 2 being the reformed Beatles under a different name, I wanted that so bad to be the Beatles. I wanted the Beatles to regroup and become, great again after breaking up in '70. So when the rumors started, and they had this Calling Occupants song, and there's certain parts in there that sounded so Beatles-like, I say, could it be them? But true Beatles fans kind of knew it wasn't them. I wanted it to be them. The only parts that really sounded like the Beatles were these play on accents that Claw 2 used on certain parts. And they tried hard to sound like English people singing songs for certain parts, but it worked. It hooked me, but they, in their own right, were really good songwriters. Their claim to fame was they're almost like the Steely Dans of Canada, in the sense that they knew how to work in a studio environment and get these cool, interesting sounds. Steely Dan was noted for not so much live playing as their studio stuff. They knew how to get a great production. Well, Claw 2, in my eyes, was this mysterious band working in a studio of great gear and all these brilliant ideas, heavily borrowed from the Beatles, obviously, to make 3 out of 5 albums. I love the first 3 albums. The last 2 are okay, but the first 3 are great. Well, their drummer, Terry Draper, he kind of borrowed from Ringo a bit, but he also had his own style. He was like Nigel Olsson from Elton John, where these guys could drum the simplest thing and lay the beat back so far and give it such a dynamic change. So Terry Draper, definitely massive influence on me growing up as a drummer in the 70s. I started playing in '77. So all these musical influences before that were just getting me hooked on music and what I was listening to. So Terry Draper being one. So Keith Moon. I love Keith Moon. Like him or hate him, I still think he's so original and so much energy, and nobody sounds like him. Probably because if you did sound like him nowadays, you'd get fired, because everything has to be quantized to the sliver, right? I'm kind of not into that, even though I pride myself in drumming tight. I like guys like Keith Moon, because They fill in the spaces organically. I love that. But his energy was just crazy. I loved it. So Live at Leeds, to me, is one of the best live albums. That one's been remastered with extra stuff in it. It's still great. But I'm partial to the vinyl version. But I love all the extras that came out with some of the re-releases. Probably the ultimate change in my music direction came when I first heard Dave Weckl. Dave Weckl one of the world's renowned drummers. Plays so many styles of music: Latin, jazz, rock. He played with Robert Plant. Most people don't even know he played on, I think, on the Honey Drippers album. That's actually Dave Weckl. He like toned right down because he's a monster player. I first saw him on the Joan Rivers talk show, which was a horrible talk show, by the way. Chick Corea was on there. Dave Weckl happened to be his drummer, and Chick Corea, phenomenal jazz pianist who recently passed away. Dave Weckl was playing drums. The band was the Electric Band. They called it the Electric Band. And I sat there and watched this band that I only heard the name Chick Corea before. But when they started playing, my mouth hit the floor. I couldn't believe what I was listening to, how tight this band was. The drumming, it was just so precise. It was, I never heard stuff that precise before. And these guys made it look like it was like they could yawn through this and make it sound this powerful without, it didn't look like they were breaking a sweat. So right away I was like, who is this guy? I was asking around, and Chick Corea says, well, it's this guy named Dave Weckl who had just joined the band. So I just went, this guy just became number one in my book for drummers. So I started to absorb stuff by Dave Weckl. So Dave, he's played on tons of stuff, but he's also put out solo stuff. He does a lot of instructional videos, and I got to study with him at Seneca College on a kind of a weekend thing. My buddy and I, we spent a fortune just to go see him and be part of this. Him and bass player John Patitucci. So we drove all the way to Seneca College. It was like shitty weather. We drove all the way down there. Had a fantastic time. We slept, I think, in the car in the parking lot because we were early to this show. I was in the back seat, he was in the front seat. We were just like, we weren't getting hotel rooms. We were going to see this clinic and not missing the first minute of it. We were going to be there early and get in there because it was quite a few people for this thing. So we made sure we were there. The hotel room and anything else came after. We wanted to make sure we're at the show. Anyways, he put out tons of albums. So the one that influenced me more than anything is one called Rhythm of the Soul. It was part of his educational programs that he had. He gave you the tracks with his drumming, then he gave you the tracks without the drumming, so you could play all these songs. And he gave you charts on it, and it was just a fun package. But that album was recorded so well that there's certain songs on there, the energy just captured me, and his playing is just so phenomenal on it. So Access Denied is one of the songs that to this day I listen to it and I just wish I could play that song with some justice, but I've tried, and it's just one of those Quest songs that I put on the back burner, and I come back to it, and eventually someday I'll be able to play the damn thing. But it's one of those songs I would love to learn it note for note the way he plays it. But you have to realize, this guy was, he's definitely born to be a superstar. I am not, but if I could just play that one song, I could die in peace. Anyways, I love the song. I love Dave Weckl. He's my my superhero drum wise. An album that my friend Gary Hatch, he's a great musician himself. I walked into a music store one day and he started talking about this band King's X. Never heard of them, right? And he had gotten this album on vinyl, and out of the blue he asked if I wanted it, give it a listen to. It basically gave me the album, and I looked at the album cover, it's kind of cool, and I said, yeah, I'll definitely do it, because I'm a music sponge. I like to listen, I like to absorb. I don't say no to anything. I want to hear it first, hear it a couple times, and then whether I like it or not comes afterwards. But give me new music. I'm always absorbing stuff. I dropped the needle on that album. My life changed. It just changed drastically. I could not believe what I was listening to. It's like, I did not like the 80s music at all. And then King's X, this album gets dropped in my hands, and I'm like, I'm talking the 80s metal stuff. And this band and this album just gets dropped in my hands by my friend. I never heard them before. I'm listening to this, and it's like, I just remember, like, I don't think my mouth closed through the whole album. I was like, what is this? These guys are fantastic. They had the Beatles harmonies, the counter melody harmonies. They had these cool songs. There was great playing. There was just these vocal dynamics of three guys making this beautiful, powerful sound, and I was like floored. I literally melted that album with that needle. I played that album thousands and thousands of times. In fact, it was starting to wear out. I had to record it on beta tape at that time just to keep it alive. So I started to do a back check on these guys, which, I mean, we didn't have the internet back then. And they had an album prior to that. So I bought that. And I've been a longtime fan up to this present day. They put out solo albums and stuff. But that album, that was a game changer. Nothing like that hit my ears before. So King's X, definitely one of my faves, always. Okay, we're going to the next page. So, in the days of MySpace, which was an internet thing, I come across this guy by total accident. This guy named Gavin Harrison. He's a drummer. He's on MySpace, has a MySpace page. I've got a MySpace page. Everybody had it. It was like the Facebook thing, you know, of past, days of past. So I got talking to this guy. He's just a cool guy to talk to. He's a drummer, and we're talking stuff, and then he starts telling me what he's done, and that he used to, he did a couple of shows with Level 42. Level 42's killer band, had hit songs. And it's like, oh Christ, this guy's in a different league. Here I thought he was just like Joe Blow like me. It's like, so he starts talking to me and stuff. So, and we got to be friends, just online friends, and shot the breeze with him quite a few times. And he said, I got some live board tapes of him playing with Level 42. He said, would you like a copy? I can, you know, send you a copy of it. So he did. Freaked me right out. So I still have it to this day. Well, he was beginning with a band called Porcupine Tree. Again, never heard of them. He had already, I guess, done the one album, and by the time I got to know him, he was promoting this album called Dead Wing. And so, as usual, it's like, okay, I'm going to go listen to this. Blown away. I was like, oh my God. I love the sound. I love everything about this band. It went from the heaviest of heavy to the soft. The dynamic was all over the place. I loved it. But the keyboard player in this band, he didn't play keyboards like a normal keyboard, like you know, playing chords. Like, he didn't do that. He was more like he did all that stuff, but he was more atmospheric. He created these I don't know how to explain it, but he created these soundscapes to join all these instruments, the guitar and drums and all that. He did this soundscape that interwove between their parts. I was just mesmerized by that. So I grabbed that, found out there was an album prior to that. There was lots of albums prior to that, but I stuck to the Gavin Harrison stuff first, and he had done one before that. So that was In Absentia, I think that's how you pronounce it. Then they put an album out, Fear of a Blank Planet, and then The Incident. There's a new one out now too, but those 4 albums with Gavin blew me away. Gavin Harrison, major influence. I used to lock myself in the basement and like try and play his stuff. He put out a transcription book, autographed to me. I bought one. So definitely a massive influence. But Porcupine Tree in general, their music is just, it's thinker's music. It's not like 2 chords and you're going to dance to a beat. No, it's you sit there and you think, you listen, and listen to layers in these songs. There are multiple layers, and I love multiple layers. I like my ears to be pulled this way in the music. So for the hard rock stuff, Steve Vai. I love Steve Vai. His music is so weird, but I don't know, I connect to it. I love the weirdness. The weirder the better. What he's playing, just the basic metal stuff, I'm not into it. But I first discovered him with the Attitude song, and I worked my butt off to learn that song, and I actually got to play it live a few times with a band I was with. But that song, Attitude song, it just basically that made me a fan right away. My favorite album by him, Sex and Religion. He has one of my favorite drummers on there, Terry Bozzio. Those two had a combination that worked. I don't know if they got along personally. I kind of figure those two would clash because they're very, meticulous, people, and I just figured there'd be some tension there. But musically, I thought that album was a masterpiece. I know the critics, I don't think they liked it, and probably most people, but I just loved it. It had anger in it. It had melody. Had some great songs, but the musicianship was great. Recording sound on that is different. I'm on the fence with it, but I love the song. I love what the guys are playing on it. Very strange songs, and I love strange. My hero, Jeff Beck. He put out an album called Guitar Shop. Terry Bozzio on drums again. Terry Bozzio brings every time he plays in a project, he brings some magic to these guitar players. Jeff Beck will always be my favorite guitar player. Just passed away recently. I have everything Jeff Beck. I love that guy's playing, and I'm a little bit distraught that he's gone because I keep wanting new music from him. But Guitar Shop, that was just massive influence on me. I used to sit and listen to that thing and go, what a change in direction. Jeff Beck is noted for changes in direction, and that was definitely one of them. And the drumming on the Guitar Shop, that got me so into Terry Bozzio, into ostinatos and all these multiple patterns. I worked on them for years and years. You can't use the shit and then the songs I play. Most of the stuff I learned from these guys, I cannot play in the bands they play. We're cover bands. Unless I'm doing originals, I can't play the stuff in a cover band. And if I did do it in there, I probably wouldn't have a job very long. But it's just fun to work on. It's a challenge, and I didn't care if I was playing it live or not. I'm definitely learning it for the challenge. One of my drum heroes, Vinny Colaiuta. Hard to pick. Like a favorite of his. He's up there. He's one of my top 5 heroes. He played in a band called Charisma. with my favorite kind of jazz rock guitar player, Michael Landau. I love that guy. He's like the Pete Townshend of jazz. I don't know. He's just so. He's got this aggressive style, and he plays jazz. I don't know. It just blows me away. Or fusion. I guess fusion would be the word. Anyways, Charisma. They had a live album. I just loved it. You can find videos of them live. And it's just, I mean, it's not everybody's taste, but it affected me. It just furthered my goal of the technician thing. I've always been this type of drummer focused on the technical thing. You know, play laid back, simple beats. I always got criticized for that, you know, because I didn't have the right feel for that song, because I always think on the technical side. So it's just a criticism I live with, and I'm okay with it. Pat Travers, Canadian guitar player, phenomenal. Go for What You Know. It's a live album that changed my early music and drum life. It got me into a totally different style of music. A friend of mine, Tommy Vazanen, if you're watching, he's the guy that got me into a lot of music. Pat Travers, Judas Priest, some, to name a few. The bass player in our, Mars Cowling, he's gone now too, sadly, but he was my favorite bass player at that time. In fact, I was learning bass because of him. I just thought, holy smokes, this guy is just making that song his own. He's complimenting everything that's going on, and I just love his playing. So I was on the fence at the time. It's like, am I going to be a drummer or a bass player anymore? Because I really like the way this guy's playing, and I was practicing my ass off on bass, trying to be him, which is a joke because there's no way I could be him. But that was my adrenaline factor. It's like, that's what I'm going to focus on. Okay, Rush. You may not believe this, but I was not a Rush fan when they came out. I liked Triumph. Because I was more into poppy songs, and when Triumph came out, they were noted for hit songs. Rush is not noted for hit songs. So Triumph, even though they influenced me a bit, like a song called Hold On. I used to love Gilmore's drum fills. They kind of galloped. They had this weird, they just had this weird kind of cool thing that I didn't hear other drummers doing. Now, he wasn't that great of a drummer. He's noted for being a singer. But his drum fills were so quirky that it just caught my ear, and I fell in love with that. Plus, he used this open concert tom thing that I couldn't understand how the drums sounded so different. Like, I didn't know anything about PAs and the mics and bottom heads off and all that stuff. So when I heard Hold On by Triumph, it was like, okay, I'm going to try that. So I ordered concert toms. So Gilmore's guilty of getting me into big drum sets, not Neil Peart. So Gilmore had this beautiful drum set. I saw him at our local arena playing, and it was like, holy smokes, I love this. And he wasn't doing anything hard, except some of his drum fills were quirky at the time to learn, because he has this different feel. So I ordered all the concert toms, cut the bottom heads, left an inch, so the rest of the whole bottom of the drum was open except for an inch, so you could keep the rims on. And I was like, yeah. But then I discovered Permanent Waves by Rush. And that album had already been out for a while. Tom Sawyer was already being on the radio. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's okay. But when I heard Spirit of the Radio, that song, and I would not have gotten into that song if it wasn't for the girlfriend now my wife, having the Rush song. So she had a record player, so we used to go back and forth playing records. So she put this on, and the Spirit of the Radio song. It's like, wow, this is great. I love this. I love the sound quality of the drumming. I just love that song. And so my wife is responsible for me getting into Rush. And the Permanent Waves album was the one that mesmerized me. And I played that thing on drums front to back, upside down, sideways. I loved it. I did it with bands, and it was super, super fun. My wife also got me into a band called UK. Again, Terry Bozzio. That was, like, again, an early influence of Terry Bozzio. And I loved that band. There was, like, no guitar player, but they had, in this particular version, this live album, and they had a violin player, keyboard, or violin, bass, and drums, but the violin player played keyboards. Phenomenal. I still have that album today, and I still love it. So anyways, I got into Rush. Kind of jumping around here. Like I say, it's just everything kind of zigzags for this. So Rush. My second favorite album, Grace Under Pressure. I can't not like any of their albums, but Grace Under Pressure, because they were influenced by the Police at the time, and I love the Police too. There's another one you get add in there for influences, but Grace Under Pressure had some of this vibe that the Police had, this reggae thing happening, and when I heard Rush do it, they just did it so uniquely that it just blew me away. So Grace Under Pressure, probably my second favorite Rush song, or Rush album. I wore that out too. I even bought it on CD after. I rebought the vinyl. It's like I got multiple copies of this because I wore the shit out. Neil Peart's drumming, I love. Just everything on those albums, those two, Permanent Waves and Grace Under Pressure. They just take me on a journey. I love the recording quality. They're not even close to being the same style of either album. They're not close to being the same recording quality either. But it's a short distance between those two albums, like a couple albums in between, but the change is so dramatic that I love it. I love bands that evolve, and Rush definitely did that right up to their last album, which is great also. Yay, another Canadian band, Saga. Most people don't even know who Saga is, but they are such great songwriters and great musicians. They just don't write songs. They're kind of in this gray area where a lot of prog rock bands hover. They don't get a lot of airplay because sometimes their songs are too long. They try and do top 40, but they don't like to be top 40 playing 2 and 3 chords. They drastically change that and make them more complicated. So you just start going complicated, bounces off most people's heads, and they don't absorb it. Could be the lead singer. The lead singer is great, but it's a different style of voice. But the drummer, Steve Nugas, phenomenal influence. My favorite album by them is Heads or Tails. Second is a live one called In Transit, but Heads or Tails, just put them on my radar. I love that album. Recording quality wise, I wish I would it needed some tweaking there. I don't know. It's not my favorite album recording wise, but playing wise and songwriting wise, it's absolutely my favorite. And then, I always got into the recording. That's why I have a studio here, because these bands influenced me drum wise, but also for the recording part of it. So here's a weird one. Frankie Goes to Hollywood. Trevor Horn, he was a magician in the studio. And the quality of Frankie Goes to Hollywood albums, especially their main one with Two Tribes, uh, and relax and welcome to the Pleasure Dome. The I could sit there and listen to those things to this day and still pick out stuff like, oh, I never heard that before. Oh, wow, listen to that. What's in there? There's so much layering. There's so much amazing technique in just the production alone on those albums that I love them. If you're into the raw kind of rock and roll stuff, obviously Frankie Goes to Hollywood is not your thing. Now, I'm not talking the band, how they sing them. I'm just talking about the recording quality. It was one of the few CDs that people were blown away by when CDs first come out. It was done so well that it was high on the list of like, this is a masterpiece for engineering. And I love the songs. Nobody sounded like Frankie Goes to Hollywood in songwriting, and yet they were danceable while being complicated. There was a lot of things going on in those songs that you have to sit down and dissect. I find a lot of musicians, especially these days, they can't sit down and listen to a 6-minute song if it's got more than 3 chords without their head exploding. Like, they can't seem to grasp, put their attention into a song that's got more than 3 chords and lots of things happening in it. I hate simplification. I hate going backwards. Like when we had all these prog rocks building these songs into these epic soundscapes, I was like just in total love with music. Nowadays, you really have to dig deep to find the kind of music I love. There's nothing wrong with a 2-chord, 3-chord wonder. But it's hard for someone to go from this giant map of music down to a small little cup full of 2 chords. I find it hard to go backwards. I don't find it inspirational. So you have to look at other things in this music, like lyrics, if the vocal melody's got some panache, as I think is the term. But, I'm just going from my influences up to present day. There are hundreds more. Like, I'm a huge jazz fanatic, so there's tons of jazz. Like John Coltrane and definitely Chick Corea. Buddy Rich, massive influence. But I can't pinpoint one album of his. I prefer his live albums. But Buddy Rich, definitely massive influence. I can't play like him either, but I can listen to him all day. Okay, so, anyways, those are some of my faves. For influences that changed my direction into music or what got me into music. There's bands like the Monkees. I love Headquarters, their third album. I think it's great at the time. They beat out the Beatles on the charts. So, and whatever the rumors are you hear about the Monkees, they did play everything on this album. So, I love that album. I wore that one out too. So, their first album has great songs on it. So, totally different for the 60s. If you listen to the 60s music and you hear some of those, not so much the Monkees hit songs, but the B tracks are killer. Just so killer. So that's why I like the Monkees. They had a lot of people behind them, pushing buttons. But the songwriters, if they weren't the Monkees writing them, there were other outdoor or outside writers. They were really influenced by the Beatles to try and come up with different styles for each song, totally different vibes. So you won't find Monkey songs to sound the same either. So, anyways, that's a scoop. I could go on, but I love all this stuff. So that's my influences for at least part of it, and I'm still being influenced today by certain drummers and guitar players and like Steve Grissom on guitar. Oh God, I love his guitar playing. Yeah.